off, please. Bathrooms are in the lobby. We are trying something new and wild today. We are live streaming onto YouTube.
All right.
We'll see how this goes. So, if you are here with someone you shouldn't be here, now is probably a good time, but all eyes are on me up here. Just saying. All right. Many of you probably know that the library is turning 100 years this year. We are having a birthday party on August 23rd. It's going to be right here. There is a bubble person that will put every person in their own bubble, even the adults, right? And we'll have cupcakes. It's our family birthday party. And if you say, well, you know, bubbles are cute, but I like bubbles, then we have a centennial celebration. Now that's our gala. It's, I dropped this. It's on October 16th. It's $100 to get in. It has a speakeasy vibe. Guess who's going to be wearing a flapper outfit? That's right, Lion Suram is going to be here. There will be hors d'oeuvres. The author of the One Maryland One book, Kin, is the book. Carol Boston Weatherford will be here. She'll be talking. There will be local authors who will be wandering around amongst the people. And should I put you on the spot and ask you to come and be one of my local authors? You don't have to pay the $100. So well, let's encourage him later, okay? So anyways, that's October 16th. And I hope a lot of you will come and buy tickets for it. Now, you are here to hear Jim Duffy, who is an award-winning writer and the author of 6 books, including 2 collections of Eastern Shore road trips, and the brand new Ordinary Heroes of Old Delmarva, inspiring true tales of courage, kindness, and community. I'm sad he didn't find a longer title for his book. If you get the local channel, WBOC, he's a regular on Delmarva Live, telling his Throwback Thursday stories. Jim founded the homegrown business Secrets of the Eastern Shore with his wife, photographer Jill Chasuta, to help locals, newcomers, and tourists alike get in closer touch with the heritage and beauty of the Delmarva Peninsula. And you are all here to please help me welcome Jim Duffy! I really
like totally over the top.
I know, right? I really want you to
really
come to
good.
my gala.
Let's see if we can have a little fun with history. That could be funny fun. That could be weird fun. That could be, oh my God, I didn't know that. That was interesting fun. We'll shoot for all those before we're done, all right? It's the middle of summertime. I thought we'd start just like Hollywood does in summertime with a little action story. If you were to go to the Talbot County Historical, anybody been to the Talbot County Historical Society lately? Yes. Seen the exhibit on U.S. colored troops? There are, I meant to look it up before coming tonight, but they have kind of records and story of U.S. colored troops for 150, 200 black men who fought in the U.S. colored troops, all from Talbot County. I want to tell you the story of one of them. His name is Matthew Roberts. First, I've got to introduce one of the oldest and richest families in Talbot County and in all of Maryland. That would be the Lloyd family up on Miles River Neck. By the 1840s, they had a dozen different farms covering 9,000 acres. They had plantations in Mississippi and Louisiana. They owned more than 700 slaves, which is completely and totally insane for the Eastern Shore. It is the most Gone with the Windish thing on the entire peninsula. All right? The Lloyds, just a little oddity, they love the name Edward. By the time we get to the 1840s, the patriarch is Edward VI. Matthew Roberts is born in 1841. He is the property of Edward VI. There are a lot of hints in the historical record that Edward VI was a lousy owner. Excessive discipline, excessive sending misbehaving people away from family and loved ones down to those plantations in the South, even accusations that he skimped on clothing and food for the entire slave population. The story that I'm about to tell is based on oral history, but it's one of these really interesting oral history things where the family is saying, this happened, this happened, this happened. And there's no book or journal or everything documenting that. But every time you get to a detail, it matches up with something in the historical record. Yes, he was in Baltimore over here. Yes, he was in this hospital over here. So all of the kind of timeline points on what the family says in the oral history is documented. All right? Matthew is 22 years old, 1863. He gets in trouble. He knows the next time he shows his face in front of his overseer, he's going to get whipped. I don't know what has happened in his life before that, but this for him is the last straw. He decides he's going to run. He has zero plan. He has zero connections on the Underground Railroad. He's on Miles River's neck. It's probable, we don't know all that much about his early life. Maybe he's been to Easton. That's about it. He probably has no idea where Pennsylvania is. But he runs on the spur of the moment. Plantation powers that be figure out he's running right away and come after him on horses. He heads for thick brush, thick forests where horses can't run. He's running, he's running, he's running, he's running. He comes to a creek. We don't know which creek. Is it Leeds Creek? Is it Hunting Creek? No idea. We just know it's up on Miles River Neck. At that creek, it's always amazing to me when you hear stories about people in these life-threatening situations who just on the spur of the moment come up with these really interesting and crazy ideas. And that's what happened to Matthew Roberts. He was wearing a hat. He took his hat off, threw it in the creek. Then he hid in some blackberry bushes. Guys come up on their horses. That hat in the creek confuses the heck out of them. Did he swim across the creek and lose his hat on the way? Did he try to swim across the creek and drown? Did he try to swim across the creek and not make it and lose his hat and come back to this side? Where'd he go? You can kind of hear the conversation. Anybody know if that boy knows how to swim? Things like that, right? They start looking for a body. And they go away from the bushes where Matthew's hiding, and he runs. This time we know where he's running. He gets to the Miles River. 5 years before this, there was a toll bridge put up over the Miles River. He's running for that bridge. Going to get off of Miles River Neck and still leave himself way too far away from freedom in Pennsylvania. There's a steamboat coming. I do not know whether Matthew Roberts jumped the turnstile at that bridge and didn't pay his toll, or whether he had saved up some money somehow and paid the toll, but he gets on that bridge. 1, 2, lands on the steamboat. We don't know exactly what happened on the steamboat. Was the steamboat staffed by black folks who just were, okay, we can live with this? Was it staffed by white folks who were like, okay, we can live with this? The next thing we know about the story, Matthew is in Baltimore. We know he actually got to Baltimore. Baltimore's mostly free people. Almost all free people, very few slaves. Pretty easy to hide there as an escaped slave. We know it's true he got to Baltimore because that is where he enrolled in the U.S. Colored Troops. Company K of the 4th Regiment. They fought mostly in Virginia and North Carolina. Civil War buffs will recognize all the battle names better than I would. Petersburg, City Point, Chapin's Farm, Dutch Gap, Spring Hill, Jordan's Farm, Bermuda 100. Combat in all those places. 1 out of 3 men in the 4th did not make it home. One battle, we don't know precisely which one. Matthew is wounded, a really bad injury in his leg. He can't move. He's left out on the field. Confederates win that battle. They're going through the field, stealing things that they think they might need. Guns, bullets, clothes, whatever, from dead bodies and from wounded bodies. This did not, I kind of hate to say this, and it did not happen a lot during the Civil War, is my understanding. But it happened here and there, especially to the U.S. colored troops. They were executing a lot of the injured soldiers. It's hard to imagine Matthew's luck, because one of the guys who's in the Confederate Army figures out that these people are from Maryland. His name is Lewis Trail. I don't know how he figured out they're from Maryland, but he starts looking around. Anybody from the Eastern Shore? Anybody from the Eastern Shore? Matthew raises his hand. And this Confederate guy comes up to him. Where are you from? He says, Miles River Neck. Turns out Lewis Trail is from Easton. He's from a very prominent family in Easton. It's hard if you're a Confederate soldier to get mail into the Free States and messages into the Free States. He desperately needs to get some message to his father back in Easton. He tells Matthew if he promises he'll get that message to him, he'll escort him back to Union lines instead of leaving him executed on the field. And Matthew says, sure, I'll get that message to your father. What else is he supposed to say, right? Ends up in first one hospital. This is documented in the record that he's in one hospital. Transferred to another hospital. This is documented in the records of the U.S. colored troops that he's in there. One of those hospitals wanted to amputate his leg. Matthew told him, hell no. He, after the war, came back here, settled in Unionville. Those of you know, Unionville was founded by U.S. colored troop veterans. There's, 12 or 14 U.S. colored troops buried in the cemetery at St. Stephen's there. He was the first guy to sign a lease with Ezekiel Cogill in Unionville, who owned that land and helped get them started. And unfortunately, it seems likely that Matthew made a bad decision when he told those doctors hell no on amputating his leg, because his leg got infected and he only survived for 2 years after the Civil War. And he's buried today. So if you go to that Talbot Historical Society, that's one of the 140 or 150 U.S. colored troop tales they have sung. Let's go for funny weird. The day of the Choptank River. Almost. Oh, so close. Revolutionized global travel. It's a story about people trying to make the world a better place, but all the work they do turns out to be pointless. There's a serious introduction, all right? Literary, English majory introduction for you. The Czech writer Milan Kundera has a quote that I want you to pay attention to before I say the story. Man proceeds in the fog, but when he looks back to judge the people of the past, he sees no fog on their path. From his present, which was their faraway future, their path looks perfectly clear to him, good visibility all the way. Looking back, he sees the path, he sees people proceeding, he sees every mistake that they make, but he never sees the fog. I came upon this story because Amelia Earhart landed in Hebron, Maryland, a little airport there, in October of 1929. And I thought, oh, that's cool, and I'm looking it up. And right next to the Amelia Earhart story is Seadrome, to be launched soon. There's a picture of all these like steel girders in a factory and all these guys hammering and welding and flame and everything like that. Anybody know what a Seadrome is? I had no idea. S-E-A-D-R-O-M-E. No idea? Good. That's the way it's supposed to be. A Delaware guy named Edward Armstrong spent 20 years working on this for DuPont. The goal was getting across the ocean. When he started in like the 19-teens, no one had done that. Eventually, Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart did it, but they did it in death-defying Pringle jars, big enough to hold, well, Pringle cans big enough to hold one person. here's the fall. It's really easy for us to look back and say, well, planes are all going to get bigger. And they're going to get so big that soon it'll be like cargo and there'll be hundreds of passengers and all their luggage and everything else. How could it possibly be that they couldn't see that? His idea was to build landing platforms. So about 8 years into when he's doing this, planes could go 500 miles. So you could get from here to Pittsburgh and that's it. And that's when he starts building these landing platforms. They're tested in the Choptank River for the first time and pass the test. And the idea is to get across the ocean by building a landing platform every 500 miles, all the way across the ocean. It's going to take a while, but it's going to be a heck of a lot faster than steamboats, still. Plus, he has some really fun ideas for what to do with these landing platforms. He wants to put bars on them. He wants to put hotels on them. If you fast forward to our time in the future, there's going to be casinos on them. There's going to be Taylor Swift concerts on them. It really sounds like fun. So, the problem is that big planes back then, to everyone except the science fiction writers, big giant 747s and all that, were still a pipe dream. There was no way that you could put something with all that fuel and all that luggage up in the air and expect it to stay up. Here's one engineer named Octave Chanute, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. This machine may even carry mail in special cases, but the useful loads will be very small. The machines may eventually be very fast and they will be used in a sport of racing, but they are never to be thought of as commercial carriers. An astronomer named William Pickering, the popular mind, often pictures gigantic flying machines speeding across the Atlantic, carrying innumerable passengers. It seems safe to say that such ideas are wholly imaginary. The experts were wrong, the science fiction writers were right back then. But the experts were the ones that provided the fog. So that everything looked great to Edward Armstrong when it came to putting these things 500 miles apart. And this is all sounds like kind of fun and games, but I want to explain to you how seriously the world took this and how if you were alive in the 1930s, you would have known very much about the Seadromes. Because what went wrong? First of all, it took a long time, then the Depression came, funding got hard, then the Roosevelt administration liked the idea, they didn't like the idea, they changed their mind, they went back and forth, and by the time you get to the late 1930s, it's actually looking like bigger planes are okay, all right? But what really went wrong, this is how seriously people took the idea. Let me see if I lost my place here for this. There it is. Now I got it. All right. All right. Imagine that I got drunk. Imagine that I punched out my poor friend Heather. Right in the nose. All right? I'm on a landing strip in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, international waters. Who gets to arrest me? No one knows. This is how seriously the world took Armstrong's idea. 20 countries passed laws about who has jurisdiction when Jim Duffy punches Heather out in the middle of the ocean. 20 different countries. That's a whole lot of meetings. That's a whole lot of public comment. That's a whole lot of committee meetings, a whole lot of votes going on all over the world. That's how seriously folks took this idea. And when I look out at kind of the world today, I think about like what is like that. Where are we not seeing the fog? And I have no expertise. I'm making this up. But it's like putting up all of these solar panels and windmills all over the farmland and things like that. And it's like, it's as if, the whole story is as if in 30 or 50 years, it turns out that you just need like 20 little solar panels about this size, real small, spread out over the eastern shore. And some goofball 100 years from now is going to be in front of a bunch of nice people telling the story of how we sat through all those meetings and had all those arguments and did all that stuff. So, there you go. Sabina mentioned that I have a new book, the one with the long title. I'm terrible at elevator speeches. I always go on for 20 minutes. I'm restricting myself to 120 words of text. Here goes. It's called Good Old Days on. It's called Ordinary Heroes of Old Delmarva, Inspiring Stories of Courage, Kindness, and Community. Every day here on Delmarva, we walk on footprints from days gone by. Yes, there are bad footprints, selfishness, greed, oppression, but there are so many good footprints, courage, kindness, community, other virtues. This book is about the good footprints, and it's about something else. How those good footprints don't just point back in time, they point forward as well, showing us ways to become better people and build better communities here in the 21st century. There's a handful of famous people in the book, but mostly not so much. You're going to meet ordinary people who did extraordinary things, leaping into action during storms and shipwrecks, reaching out with helping hands across social divides, bringing neighbors together in times of need. It's an uplifting book. You're going to want to step right into the footprints of these ordinary heroes. I'm going to tell a couple stories from that. The first one is going to sound like current events. It is set here in Talbot County. What is going to make you think of events from a few years back in Arizona, and Texas, and Martha's Vineyard, and New York, and Washington, D.C. Because in 1755, in Oxford, Maryland, a ship called the Ranger pulled up to the dock, and on board were 200 or so desperate immigrants. They were hungry, they were penniless, many were dreadfully sick, some were on the verge of death, none spoke English. That ship dropped them off and vamoosed. And the way to think about this story in our current events is the way the governors in Arizona and Texas, while dealing with this influx of immigrants from a few years back, decided that they shouldn't bear the entire burden of that issue, that we needed to spread the problem around a little bit. And so they sent people to various other locations around the country. That is pretty much what happened in 1755. How this happened is a really complicated and kind of horrifying story. Historians call it the Great Upheaval. There are French settlers up in Canada, Nova Scotia, the Bay of Fundy. They have been there for generations, and everyone has ignored them. They left France, the French didn't care about them. You know, this whole thing where the French are saying, we control Canada, the English are saying, we control Canada, and nobody cares about this one little insular community of Fundy French people living on the Bay of Fundy for many, many, many years. And then the French and Indian War happens. And all of a sudden, the English do care about these French-speaking people in territory that they claim. They try to get these French people to make an oath of loyalty to the British crown. The French are a little worried about this, not because they're loyal to France, but they're worried about what the local Indians are going to think, because the Indians might side with the French and they don't want to be killed by the Indians. It's all very, people have written multi-volume books on this whole thing. Long story, very short. The British come to think they are all traitors, and they evict all of them from the Bay of Fundy. And they load them all up on ships, and they spread them all over British North America. They send them down to the Caribbean, they send them to New York, they send them to Annapolis. About 900 or so landed in Annapolis. And the government in Annapolis was like, oh, 900's too much for us, and they started sending them around to all the different counties. And that's how the Rangers showed up in Oxford. Now, if you were going to guess who in your neighborhood might do the right thing in such a circumstance, you would never pick a guy named Henry Callister. He was a businessman from Great Britain working for a trading company called Foster Cumberland. He was a snob, thought very highly of himself. The local rumor mill had him pegged as a womanizer. He had done quite a few petty, underhanded things in the business world. Bosses worried in writing, in their letters and reports, that he had a serious drinking problem. And yet there is Henry Callister's name, the unlikely hero, written in a testimonial signed later by a good number of those desperate French refugees. We were reduced to die of hunger, saving the assistance of Mr. Callister. We can say with truth that he has saved our lives. So what did he do? First, Henry Callister, first thing to note is that he completely agreed with his neighbors. He was very suspicious of these French people, particularly suspicious of the fact they were Catholics. That was a big problem for him. Second thing to note is that as he decided to do something about this, he kept meticulous records of every single penny he spent on this project because he was sure that some government official somewhere down the line would reimburse him for his expenses. He was wrong about that. So everybody is very suspicious of these French people because we're in the middle of a war where even Annapolis and Baltimore feel like they're under threat of attack from the French and the Indians. And everybody doesn't want anything to do with these French people. But this is the difference. This is what Henry Callister, bottom line, decided when balancing his suspicions versus his conscience. Our aversion to their principles must not be allowed to destroy the seeds of our humanity. So he dug into his own pocket, bought them food. He set out to convince neighbors to pitch in. He found a helping hand in Reverend Thomas Bacon, White Marsh Church, the ruins out there on Route 50. They had a service out there. They had a special collection out there to try and raise money for the refugees. It did not go well. The entire congregation gave less than Reverend Bacon himself gave. Callister kept plugging away, taking refugees into his own home. Reverend Bacon took some into his own home. He eventually twisted enough arms to get some of them in some other homes. And after all that arm twisting, there were still way more refugees than places for them to sleep and meals for them to eat. And I neglected to mention that the Ranger arrived in Oxford on December 6th. Winter is coming. Callister got creative. Perhaps the devious things he'd done in the business world or in his romantic dealings kind of came in handy at this moment. He had a little experience in coming up with interesting ideas. He used his business connections to get a young sailor named Jeremiah Banning to load all the remaining refugees onto a schooner called the Hummingbird and sail up the Wye River, as we just discussed in the Matthew Roberts story, where the Lloyd plantation is, and lots of other rich and wealthy people are living. He may have told a few of those rich people that what he had in mind, but he definitely did not tell a lot of them what he had in mind, and he went from rich guy doc to rich guy doc and just dropped off some refugees and kept them. And the rich guy screamed and yelled. Edward, who knows what it was, Edward the 18th Lloyd, by this point I don't even know, wrote to the King of England in outrage at having these people land on his dock, but none of them kicked the French off. They all took them in. The French did not have, I'm sure, a very nice life here. They were probably treated just like the enslaved population, earning their food, doing labor and everything else. And they just settled in. Some of them stayed permanently and became our neighbors. But most left, and they left, I mentioned they were spread all over the place, down in the Caribbean and all over the colonies. Eventually, over time, there's a big grapevine that develops, spreading the word that all of the Fundy French are regathering in a new place. That place is Louisiana, and they are our Cajuns today. So some at least, of the Cajuns of Louisiana owe their life to an egotistical drunk in Oxford named Henry Kelster. Let's see, which one should I do next? One beautiful thing about being a history nerd is it tends to calm you down a little bit. You see people, you have friends whose head was exploding because Joe Biden was president, and you have friends whose head was exploding because Donald Trump was president. But when you're a history nerd and you're like reading old newspapers all the time and things like that, you realize that if you'd lived in the 1890s, you would have had friends whose head was exploding because Grover Cleveland was president. I couldn't even tell you who Cleveland beat in an election or lost in an election. Somehow every generation thinks theirs is the most important time on the face of the earth, and everything is on the balance for the future and the past, and everything is good. And then most periods end up being like a paragraph in a high school history text. We'll see what happens. Well, our kids will see what happens about. So this notion that we live in unprecedented, divided times. Think about 1870. Civil War just ended. Reconstruction is underway. In 1870, black men get the right to vote. Thanks to the 15th Amendment. I'm embarrassed to say that here on the Delmarva Peninsula, not only did Maryland legislature vote no on that amendment, they voted no unanimously. They made up for it. They voted yes in 1973. So President Grant signs this amendment on March 30th, and it becomes law. And then, nothing. The first post-amendment election is in Salisbury, here on Delmarva, is in Salisbury in April, saw a black vote total of 0. The next one is in St. Michael's. Black vote total is 0. Then comes Easton. Black vote total is 0. Easton Star. I believe this is sarcasm. It's a little bit hard to tell. Africa did not make an appearance on the field of elective battle. I have not come across a crystal clear explanation for why it was such a slow start. Maybe it was just too soon. They didn't have time to get their systems in order. Maybe that was just a cheap excuse. It was up the road in Chestertown where things finally changed. The white Democrats, this is what makes me a little bit skeptical of the fact that, we didn't have time to get our systems in order. Everybody knew that this was coming. The white people in Chestertown prepared very diligently for the arrival of black voters. In 1868, 2 years before it became law, they won permission from the state legislatures to restrict voting to property owners only. Newsflash, not a lot of black property owners in 1870. But the number was not 0. There were a handful of businessmen in Chestertown who had made enough money to buy some property. William Perkins had a famous oyster house. James Jones had a big grocery store. There's another guy, Isaac Anderson. I've never been able to figure out what it was he did to get money, but he owned property too. They all owned a little land as well. But of course, most blacks worked as house servants or unskilled laborers and did not have any property. So they had an election at the end of May. They're the 4th election on the Eastern Shore. These guys knew how to throw a party. First they threw a party at Jane's United Methodist Church, still standing up in Chestertown. Packed house of 500 people, all kinds of preaching and singing. and all that. Just before Election Day, they threw a giant parade through the town, streets filling up more than 3 hours before the noontime parade begins. School children waved flags of every state of the Union. The queen of the parade, dressed as the goddess of liberty, 250 wagons, 300 mounted horsemen, marching bands from as far away as Wilmington, Delaware, all celebrating the arrival of black male property owners being able to vote in Chestertown, Maryland. Big party outside of town after the parade in Bakers and Woods, and then they just did the parade backwards all the way back in through town. But only property owners can vote. What's the good of having all these parties? Before this election, that guy I've never been able to figure out how he made his money, Isaac Anderson, filed a really strange document at the Kent County offices. The document covered a tiny plot of land measuring 3 feet by 3 feet 9 inches square. And the land was a bunch of marshy muck, basically on the shores of the Chester River. And Anderson's paperwork documented the sale of that sliver of land for $15 to a partnership that consisted of 44 black men. They paid 34 cents each. Yes, the law those white guys in Chestertown passed didn't say how much property you had to own. And election day came, 44 new voters, right? The average margin for the party of Lincoln, which swept all 7 races in the election, was 22 votes. It was quite a shock to the white folks in Chestertown who had opposed that. They immediately cried foul, but they had a little problem, which was that they themselves had pulled the same trick 2 years before, selling a little land to, and the worst part is, to the most upstanding ministers in town who didn't own property. They sold the little land to them so that they could be sure that they had to vote. And so the Cecil Whig summed up this story by saying the colored men had out-generaled them. And a story about the whole thing and how great at politics the Negroes of Maryland are, that was run in the New York Tribune, actually appeared in newspapers all over the country. So those are 2 examples from the book. And now, I have to do this story when I'm in Talbot County. It's the only story in which I am a character. But don't worry, I make a fool of myself. It is kind of an old historical story because I'm an old man. This happened in the 1990s, late 1990s. I was still a big city boy living in Baltimore. A magazine up there asked me to go down to this place I'd barely heard of called Tillman Island and write a story for all the big city people about what it would be like to go spend the weekend on Tillman Island. The most famous description of Tillman Island, the one they use at the Waterman's Museum down there, is always, some waterman described it as a place that just gets up and goes to work. Trivia, it is, as of a couple years ago, last I looked, still the busiest drawbridge in the United States of America. I guess it's a few years ago, 2018, it went up and down 10,620 times, or 30 a day, and there's no drawbridge anywhere that goes up more often than that. Trivia that I learned from a guy named Robert Freeman who came up to me after one of these talks. He used to work for Maryland National Bank, that old bank building on Tillman that was the nautical bookstore for a while. He knew people who worked there, and he worked there for a while himself. He actually double-checked this for me with some of his old colleagues, and he guarantees me 1,000% that it's true, that if you push the alarm on one of the tellers, pushed the alarm in that bank, whoop, drawbridge went up. Sorry, Mr. Bank Robber. Nowhere to go. I go down there, the big city boy goes down there, and I end up aboard the Rebecca T. Ruark with Captain Wade T. Murphy. Now, I don't know how many of you have met Captain Murphy. I suspect that this was not the only day of his life when he was in a really cantankerous mood. This was a time when the crab population was in trouble. Everybody was blaming the watermen. Now, at that time, Mr. Big City Boy, right? I am enrolled in an environmental studies program at Johns Hopkins University. And every week I'm going up to campus twice a week. And I'm listening to all the big city experts tell me everything that's going on in the Chesapeake Bay. The whole program is focused on the Chesapeake Bay environment. And I'm listening to all the experts every week. And I'm reading all the latest studies and all the latest books. And the Bay Journal, I'm going cover to cover through this Bible of environmental reporting every month when it comes out. And all Captain Wade Murphy wants to talk about is how one of the big problems with the crab population in the Chesapeake Bay is ghost pots. What he's talking about when he talks about ghost pots is you got a crab pot, it gets old, you throw it away. Just throw it off your boat, throw it away. Or the line breaks and it goes down. And his claim is they just keep catching crabs forever. Now, I am up to date on all what the environmental experts are saying. And I've double checked this since then, since I started telling this story. No one, before the year, we'll get to it, no one is talking about ghost pots. And I am embarrassed to say that I was on the boat with that crazy waterman. And what I'm thinking of is, what the hell is this goofball talking about? I got a lot of opportunities in the years that followed to think about the fact that I had asked that question. February 1st, 2006. They check in and they don't check out. Abandoned ghost crab pots haunt Bay's bottom, luring creatures to their doom. 2008, derelict pots raise specter of ghost fishing, lost traps numbering in the thousands. Continued to catch crabs, fish on Bay's bottom. 2010, watermen pulled 10,500 derelict crab pots from the bay. 2013, 2016, 2020, watermen recover 10,000 ghost crab pots in Virginia. It goes on after that. So the message that I take from this story is not choosing one side or choosing the other side. That's not why I tell this story. I tell this story as a big city boy who came down here thinking he knew what he needed to know and finding out that he didn't. And finding out in a super embarrassing way by dismissing the guy, like Captain Wade Murphy in his mind. And so what I take away from it is not that in all these fights between the farmers and the environmentalists and the fishermen and the watermen and the environmentalists, I'm not saying one side is right, I'm not saying one side is wrong. All I'm saying is that you ignore at your peril the wisdom that comes from spending a few generations working the water. My friend Heather's in Royal Oak. Did you guys know that Royal Oak was the healthiest place in America?
No.
Did you know that?
I didn't.
No? You didn't know that? In 1874, this sentence appeared in a local newspaper. According to unpublished statistics, the health center of the United States is a circle with Royal Oak as the center and a radius of 4 miles.
Wasn't Michigan?
And it spread. Historian Dixon Preston in the History of Talbot County. Picked up by metropolitan newspapers and published and republished, embellished and exaggerated throughout the United States for the next 20 years. It even appeared in the Manila Times on the Philippine Islands. Local example from the Eastern Star Democrat in 1889. The judge looks hale and hearty and says his health is remarkably good. He lives at Royal Oak, one of the healthiest localities according to statistics in America. Another example from the Baltimore Sun in 1916. The hotel is, quote, located in a district said by Dr. Christopher and Dr. Cox of the health department to be the most healthful locality in the United States. So where did that first reference in 1874 came from? Came from a guy writing for the St. Michael's Comet newspaper. He was trying to write copy for a real estate ad. He was trying to help some agents sell some property, and he completely and totally made it up. There you go, the capital of fake news, not the capital of hell.
I was gonna share it with all my friends.
Let's give Delaware a moment here, as long as we're on Delaware Peninsula. And let's bust some stereotypes along the way, all right? Now, if I were to say cowboy, you know, rootin' tootin', all that, you would probably think of working class hero type, rugged individualist, out on his own. A guy named Joseph Carey, born in Milton, Delaware in 1845, who is in the Cowboy Hall of Fame, which is actually a very high, did you know there was a Cowboy Hall of Fame? There's a Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And they honor everybody who's important to cowboy mythology and culture and everything else, all the people throughout history who are most important to the notion of cowboy. Joseph Carey is in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And he was born in 1845 with a silver spoon planted firmly and deeply in his mouth. Filthy rich family. All the pampered upbringing you can imagine. By the age of 21 or something, he has an Ivy League law degree. His family is so politically connected that at the age of 24, he gets an appointment from President Ulysses S. Grant to be the U.S. Attorney for the newly created territory of Wyoming. And he goes out to Wyoming, becomes a Supreme Court judge, becomes a governor, becomes a senator. One of the main streets in Cheyenne is called Carey Avenue. The whole complex of all court buildings in Cheyenne is called the Carey Center. Well, that's all politics. We haven't talked much cowboy yet. But he did become, he changed ranching. He changed cattle ranching. When he got to Wyoming, cattle ranching was very much the loner, small farmer, small operation, and it was on the open range, right? No fences, no nothing. Your cattle are just wandering, they're branded, and eventually you figure out where they are, and you go. He and a couple other people, Joseph Carey and a couple other people, saw that that was just not going to work in the long run. Because farmers started moving in, sheep people started moving in, they started building fences around their land, they didn't want the cattle to come into their land. There's a new technology involved, barbed wire comes in, and so he, along with a couple other guys, sees the future of cattle ranching as becoming these giant cattle barren operations. And his CY Ranch eventually covers 15,000 acres, and that's why he's in the Cowboy Hall of Fame, is for basically helping to invent modern cattle farming. All right? But there's another stereotype that I want to get to. All right? I would say it's safe to say that not many people would think of cowboys as a group of people being ardent feminists.
No.
Well, that's exactly what our Delaware cowboy was. The 19th Amendment became law in 1920, giving women the right to vote, but the debate about it went many, many decades before that. When Wyoming became a territory in 1869, right after the Civil War, they immediately passed a law saying, we are a territory where women can vote and women can hold public office. When they did this, it was not just the first place in the United States to make such a law. It was the first place in the whole wide world to make such a law. Wow, why not? A couple theories about this. One is that life on the frontier, particularly in a place like Wyoming, was just a little different. It was a little messy. It was a little all hands on deck all the time. And all those kind of sex roles got all blurred. And when it came time to thinking about it, it was everybody was like, oh, no, it's fine if my wife votes. Are you kidding me? She works harder than I do, right? The other theory is a little more cynical. The other theory is there were too many men in Wyoming and not enough women. And so they decided to let women vote and shouted from the rooftops, hoping that more women would go. And they could get dates. I actually don't buy that theory. And I'll tell you why I don't buy that theory. Those cowboys genuinely believed in that cause. The issue was when Wyoming comes up for statehood in 1890, like what is that, 11 years later, 21 years later, I've lost track of my math. There are lots of powerful, snooty East Coast people, present company excluded, who do not want to welcome a state into the Union that lets women vote. They want Wyoming to take that clause out of their constitution in order to become a state. Now, who is representing Wyoming during this momentous debate over statehood? Yes, it's our Delmarva cowboy, Joseph Carey. And he gets together with his Wyoming people, sends messages back home, you know, all the time it takes for those messages to come back. And then he very proudly stands up in the halls of Congress and says, Wyoming will stay out of the Union for 100 years rather than come into it without women's suffrage. They gave in. They let Wyoming come in with women's suffrage, and it was the first state where women could vote. And Joseph Carey was not done. He showed up at all the suffragette conventions in the decades that followed, always had a seat up on the dais, always gave a big speech about how great it was in Wyoming that women had the right to vote. Well, there you have it, our Delmarva cowboy, full of surprises. Let's do one more. All right. This one's just fun. There's no extra adjective, it's just fun. 1913, Delaware adopts a new law requiring a waiting period for weddings. You can't just go get married, you've got to apply for your license and wait a few weeks. New York and Pennsylvania had already passed those laws. And that meant, I'm on like a drinking theme tonight, but that meant that if you got drunk and you met somebody and you had to get married that night, there was only one place to go if you were in that entire urban corridor. You had to get on a train and cross the border and go to Elkton, Maryland at the top of the Eastern Shore.
Oh, yeah.
That is how Elkton became the quickie wedding capital of the East Coast. In 1912, before that law was passed, 200 marriage licenses were issued in Elkton. In 1936, a couple decades after it was passed, 11,791 wedding licenses were issued in Elkton. More than 20 wedding chapels lined Main Street. There were some idiosyncrasies to this business. I don't have no idea why, but you were not allowed to advertise. No newspaper advertising, no sandwich boards on the street, no advertising. But business people, you know, they do what they do. And so they would hire taxi drivers. And they'd link up the taxi driver with the chapel, and the taxi driver would be sitting outside the train station and would meet the couple, the drunk couple, and would convince them to go, and they'd get a kickback from the chapel, and all this kind of stuff was going on. And I did this short version of this on my website, and this woman wrote into me. And I always have to give her credit. Her name's Andrea Bolden Gagliano. She said, my aunt, Pauline Bolden, was married to Harry Hedgie Woolman. During the Elkton Chapel heyday, they would ride on motorcycles in front of the potential and just married couples, with my aunt riding on Hedgie's shoulders and doing all kinds of tricks. She said times were tough, and that was a quick way to make a buck. That was a rabbit hole I had to jump down. So, turns out Hedgie, I spent some time down there. Hedgie had all kinds of tricks. My favorite, apparently when Pauline was not around, he would ride his motorcycle backwards from the train station to the chapel. He was quite the acrobat. He had all kinds of other tricks. Now, there were lots of famous Hollywood people who got married in Elkton. There was a lot, they would fly from Hollywood, they'd go out Broadway in New York, and then they'd fly to Hollywood and make a movie, so they were always in this area too. Joan Fontaine got married in Elkton, Martha Ray, Debbie Reynolds, and one of them, I've never been able to figure out his name, was a promoter-producer who saw Hedgie do his thing, maybe with Pauline on the shoulders, maybe riding backwards, I don't know, but said that he should come out and be a stuntman in Hollywood, and so Hedgie did. If you've ever seen the old black and white Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Laughton, the most famous scene in the thing has a damsel in distress about to be hung at the gallows in an alleyway, and swoop, the hunchback comes down from a building up and swoops up the damsel in distress. That was not Charles Laughton, that was Hedgie from Elkton. All came to an end in 1938. Maryland adopted a waiting period too. Every single county in the state voted for the waiting period except for Cecil County, Elkton, which voted against it. They kept going for a long time. The last chapel didn't close until 2017, actually. But I have to close this story. I promised this woman. I was telling this story one night, this woman. It was at what we used to call an old people's home. I'm old, not saying anything bad. But she was doing a walker, she was a little fragile. And she came up to me afterwards. She was spitting fire. I could see it from a long way away. I'm a little unnerved at her approach. I said, yes, ma'am, what can I do for you? She goes, I want you to know one thing. I said, yes, ma'am. Not everybody who got married in Elkton was drunk. I promised her I was going to make that very clear every single time I told this. Anybody got questions? We're done. Everybody got questions? Did we have fun? Was it okay? Go ahead.
Question about your first story,
Matthew Roberts.
Did he deliver the message?
I assume so, but I don't know. I can tell you that Lewis Trail, the Confederate soldier, I neglected to mention, he lived a long and very wealthy farming life in Talbot County, and there are stories in like the Star Democrat about him going to Confederate soldier reunions and having the time of his life in like the 1890s and things like that. So there's no official record of Matthew Roberts knocking on the door, but I assume so. Yes, ma'am.
French that came from the Bay of Fundy.
Yeah.
Are there any descendants that?
I believe, yeah, I think there are a good number that are here. I don't know personally of any particular family, but my understanding is, yes, there are still a good number on Delmarva descended from them. Yes, sir?
How much, do you find most of your research online, or do you have to go into like local county historical?
I do most of it online at this point. It's a real blessing. And I also have a habit of, instead of reading modern newspapers, I read old newspapers. So I will get up and I will just, instead of scanning these headlines, I'll scan headlines from 1933 locally, see what was going on. I get a lot of ideas that way. Thank you very much for coming. I do have some books here if anyone
That's
is
right.
interested. I'll be holding court here.
I told you he was an awesome speaker, didn't I?
Did I stay in the camera rings all the
Yeah,
time?
who knows? Probably not.
I think I might have wandered
But
around.
that's
But I had to punch Heather in the nose.
It's all right, but let me stay in the camera and plug your books.
Oh, sure.
Because
Okay.
this is the
Here's
one.
the new one.
Here's the new one. Here are the old ones. They are all here and today only. He will sign those books for no extra charge for all of you. And Joyce, thank you for coming and come
thank
see
you
us
for
for our gala, see us for our